is Dr. Margaret Parachek-Vance, author of the abstract titled Dementia Revealed, Novel Chromosome 6 Locus for Late Onset Alzheimer's Disease, provides genetic evidence for folate pathway abnormalities. She's joined by Dr. Jonathan Haynes.
And I also asked my postdoc, Dr. Adam Nye, who did a lot of the hard work on the abstract, to join us as well. N-A-J, not as it's pronounced. And thank you to the Academy for recognizing our work. A little background information. It's almost been 2 decades since we found the major risk factor in late onset Alzheimer's, which is the ApoE, the apolipoprotein E4 allele. And we have spent about 15 years trying to identify, because we realize ApoE only accounts for about 40% of the total genetic effect. And we've been coming up and looking at a lot of candidate genes, and we haven't really found a lot of candidates that are universally embraced. This tool that came across during this time, whole genome-wide association studies, which allowed us to interrogate the genome of individuals, looking at up to 1 million markers, 1 million variants per individual, opened the door to allow us to find some of these additional genetic effects. When this tool first came out, I think we were naive. We thought we'd find other very large effects, and we could have small sample sizes of 500 or even less, some of the first studies that came out using what we call GWAS, or genome-wide association studies. But we quickly found out that we had probably found most of the major large effects, and that we were looking for more minor effects, yet significant genetic effects in disorders like onset Alzheimer's. Our study today is what I like to call one of the next generation GWASs, where we're embracing larger sample sizes because we know we're looking for smaller effects. And in fact, our first study that we reported a year and a half ago, we had about 500 cases, so in 500 controls. In this study here, we had a discovery data set of almost 1,000 cases and about 1,100 controls. And then we replicated our data in another 1,300 cases and another 2,000 controls. So we're really getting up there in numbers. And I think what was interesting is that we found that besides apolipoprotein E, which everybody in Alzheimer's who does these studies find it's the #1 hit, there's no discussion that that's not a major risk factor for Alzheimer's. We found another gene, the methylene tetrahydrofolate dehydrogenase like protein gene, that met genome-wide significance, which is sort of the significance bar that we look at in these types of studies. And I think what was interesting about it, and what was so exciting, is that it's a gene that's involved in the folate pathway. It's involved in changing homocysteine to methionine, and there's been a ton of literature, or significant literature in the past, I'd say, decade, about the potential role of homocysteine in dementias and late onset Alzheimer's. So I think a lot of times when we do these types of studies, we find genes, and then we have to try to understand how they could possibly be involved in this disorder we're looking at. The excitement here is we found the gene that people have been writing about the biology for almost a decade. And yet, we now have a gene that may tie the genetics with the biology. And I was going to ask Jonathan or Dr. Haynes or Dr. Nye if they want to add something.
That's a fairly complete description, actually.
I just would add that the power of this second generation GWAS is really starting to break through some of the issues that we had with trying to identify these somewhat smaller but much more pervasive kinds of effects. So it's really been great to have that technology available to us, and the ability to get more samples and be able to do these kinds of studies has just been very, very helpful for us.
And I should say that these studies here are the tip of the iceberg. The National Institute on Aging has recently funded a consortium where we'll be looking at tens of thousands of samples in terms of GWAS studies. Some of the studies that have come out of Europe recently. There were 2 very large GWAS studies that also unequivocally identified some new genes in Alzheimer's. So the numbers are really adding up. The collaborations, the consortiums are making a huge difference, not just in Alzheimer's, but in multiple sclerosis, where there's large consortium efforts. I'm trying to think of other neurological diseases, some of the stroke efforts. ALS, large consortiums are together. And the power of this approach to find these, what we call susceptibility genes and common risk factors, is really coming to fruition now.